Welcome to the Wellbeing Podcast, where every episode is a step toward a healthier, happier you. Let's grow, thrive, and shine together. Today, we're tackling something I think we all struggle with, that nagging inner critic or fear-based voice that holds us back. You know, the one right.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
universal. And we're going to unpack this using three really interesting sources you've shared. A practical guide to conquering fear, we're calling D.PDF, research on how fear impacts success, and insights from the self-help book, Mind Frick.
Okay, so let's dive right in. D.PDF uses this phrase, fear-based voice, a lot. What exactly are we talking about here, and why does it matter so much?
Think about a time you wanted to go for something, a promotion, a creative project, maybe even just speaking up in a meeting. That voice pops up with doubts, worries, worst-case scenarios trying to convince you to play it safe. D.PDF argues this is what keeps so many of us from reaching our potential.
So it's not just about feeling anxious, it's about that anxiety stopping us from taking action.
Yeah, exactly. And what's fascinating is that the research you shared points to this being hardwired into us. The amygdala, the part of our brain that controls the fight or flight response, is constantly scanning for threats. But in modern life, those threats are often things like presentations or deadlines, not saber-toothed tigers.
Oh, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Public speaking is a big one for me. I always imagine the worst case scenario, even those never actually happened.
Yeah.
And DPDF lists a bunch of other ways this voice shows up. Self-criticism, constantly doubting our abilities.
Yeah, it's incredibly common. The Journal of Behavioral Therapy found that over half of people report negative self-talk as a major stressor. But here's the thing. Dr. Joseph Ledoux, whose work is cited in the research you shared, found that the amygdala can hijack our rational thinking when fear kicks in. So we need to learn to recognize when it's happening and not let it run the show.
That makes a lot of sense. So how do we start to untangle ourselves from this fear-based thinking? DPDF seems to offer some practical steps.
The first step is simply becoming aware of it. Noticing that voice without judgment, like, oh, there's my fear talking again. Just that recognition can create some distance and lessen its power.
So it's like acknowledging its presence but not getting swept away by it.
Right. From there, DPDF suggests challenging the validity of these fearful thoughts. Ask yourself, is there any real evidence to support this fear? Or am I catastrophizing?
I like that. It's like putting those thoughts on trial.
Yeah,
But what about when the fear feels overwhelming and those rational arguments just aren't working?
that's where self-compassion comes in. Treat yourself with the same kindness you would offer a friend who's struggling. And DPDF also talks about the power of reframing those negative thoughts. Instead of saying, I'm going to fail, try shifting it to, I might fail, but I'll learn something valuable in the process.
That ties in nicely with something Mindford brings up,
Yeah.
the idea of the false self versus the true self.
Yes. Mind Crick argues that this fear-based voice is often coming from what it calls our false self, a protective shell we develop in childhood, often based on fear and a need to fit in.
So it's not really who we are at our core, it's more like a survival mechanism.
Exactly. And the problem is this false self can block us from accessing our true self, which Mind Frick describes as calmer, more intuitive, and connected to our true potential. They use this interesting analogy of the ocean and a teacup. The ocean represents the vastness of our true self, while the teacup is the limited perspective of our false self.
That's a really vivid image. It makes me think about how much of our lives we spend operating from that limited teacup perspective.
And what Mind Frick suggests is that quieting the mind through practices like mindfulness helps us to essentially empty that teacup and allow more of that ocean, that true self, to emerge. They even have this experiment where they have people hum while others shout. When the shouting stops, you can hear the humming much more clearly.
Wow, that's powerful. So are we saying that silencing the shouting of our fears and anxieties allows the hum of our true self to come through?
That's the idea. And Mind Frick argues that when we operate from this truer place, we're more likely to make choices based on joy and purpose rather than fear and obligation. It's a big shift in perspective.
This is all really resonating with me. And it makes me wonder how much of my own life is driven by that fear-based voice versus what truly brings me joy and purpose.
That's a really important question to reflect on, and honestly, it's one we all need to keep asking ourselves. Because the more we can become aware of those patterns, the more we can start to make conscious choices that align with who we really are. It's a journey, not a destination. We're constantly learning and growing, and that includes learning to manage that fear-based voice.
And it seems like DPDF is all about taking action as a way to overcome that fear.
Exactly. It emphasizes that courage isn't the absence of fear, but rather acting despite it. The more we expose ourselves to what we fear, the more we realize it's often not as scary as we thought.
That's where that 50% statistic from the American Psychological Association comes in, right? The one that says exposure to feared situations reduces anxiety over time.
Precisely. It's like building a muscle. The more we practice facing our fears, the stronger we become. And that builds confidence, which makes that fear-based voice a little quieter each time.
So it's a positive feedback loop. Facing fear builds confidence, which makes it easier to face more fear, and so on.
Exactly. And that ties back to what Mindfreak says about living from a place of joy and purpose rather than fear and obligation. When we align our actions with what truly matters to us, fear starts to take a back seat.
It's like we're shifting our motivation from avoiding pain to pursuing something we genuinely care about.
Yes. And that shift in motivation is incredibly powerful. It's like we're tapping into a whole new source of energy and resilience.
Okay, but that brings up a question for me. Mindfreak talks a lot about the true self, but it feels a little abstract. How do we actually know what our true self wants? How do we even begin to access it?
That's a great question. And it's where things get really interesting. Mindfreak suggests that a lot of what we think we want is actually coming from that conditioned false self.
So we might be chasing goals that aren't truly aligned with who we are.
It's possible. Think about it. How many of your goals are based on what you think you should be doing, or what you think will impress others, or even just on avoiding discomfort or failure?
Wow, when you put it like that, it makes me realize how much of my decision-making is influenced by external factors. But if we're not listening to that external noise, how do we actually tune into our true self?
Mindfreak talks about this in terms of quieting the mind. They emphasize practices like mindfulness and meditation as ways to create space from the constant chatter of our thoughts.
So it's about noticing those thoughts without judgment, just letting them come and go without getting swept away by them.
Exactly. It's about becoming the observer of your mind rather than getting caught up in the drama of it all. And when you create that space, when you quiet the mind, that's when the whispers of your true self can start to come through.
It's like we're creating a clearing in the forest, allowing the sunlight to reach the forest floor.
That's a beautiful analogy. And from that clearing, from that place of stillness and awareness, you can start to sense what truly resonates with you, what brings you joy, what feels aligned with your values, what makes you feel alive and energized.
And those are the clues to what our true self is calling us towards.
Exactly. It's not always a loud, booming voice. Sometimes it's a gentle nudge, a whisper of intuition, a sense of excitement or curiosity.
But how do we know if it's the true self speaking or just another version of that fear-based voice disguised as something more positive?
That's where discernment comes in. Mindfreak emphasizes the importance of checking in with your body. Does this decision, this path, this goal feel expansive in your body? Or does it feel constricting?
So it's about paying attention to our gut feelings, our intuition.
Exactly. Trusting that inner wisdom that often speaks to us through our body sensations. And it's also about aligning your actions with your values. If something feels out of integrity, even if it looks good on paper, it's probably not coming from your true self.
This is starting to feel like a much more holistic approach to decision-making. It's not just about logic or external factors. It's about integrating our intuitions, our values, and even our physical sensations.
That's exactly right. It's about bringing all of those aspects of ourselves into alignment to make choices that feel truly authentic and empowering.
This is all so helpful, and it makes me think about all the times I've second-guessed myself or let doubt creep in. What are some practical ways to cultivate that inner knowing and start trusting our intuition more?
There are a few things that can help. One is simply paying attention to your inner experience. Notice those moments when you feel a sense of clarity or excitement. What were you thinking about? What were you doing?
So it's about becoming more aware of those moments when our intuition is speaking to us.
Yes. And another powerful practice is journaling. Taking time to reflect on your experiences and notice any patterns that emerge. You might start to see certain themes or recurring desires that point you in the right direction.
It's like we're gathering data on ourselves, becoming our own inner researchers.
Exactly. And as you gather that data, you can start to trust your own insights and make choices that feel more aligned with who you truly are.
This is all so inspiring. It feels like we're moving beyond just managing fear and into a whole new realm of self-discovery and personal empowerment.
And that's really the heart of it all. Overcoming fear isn't just about silencing that inner critic. It's about creating space for our true selves to emerge and lead the way.
It feels like we're talking about a whole new way of being in the world. One where we're not constantly reacting to fear, but instead acting from a place of authenticity and purpose.
That's a great way to put it. And Mindfreak emphasizes that this shift can have a profound impact on every area of our lives, our relationships, our work, our creativity, even our health and well-being.
So it's not just about feeling better emotionally, it's about actually creating a more fulfilling life overall.
Exactly. When we're aligned with our true selves, we naturally gravitate towards experiences and opportunities that nourish us, that support our growth, and that allow our unique gifts to shine.
It's like we're removing those internal barriers that have been holding us back and allowing ourselves to step into our full potential.
That's the idea. And it's not about becoming perfect or fearless. It's about learning to dance with fear, to acknowledge its presence without letting it dictate our choices.
That makes me think about something from D.PDF, the idea that taking action despite fear is what actually helps us overcome it.
Right. It's like that old saying, the only way out is through. The more we push ourselves to do the things that scare us, the more we realize that we're capable of so much more than we thought.
And that builds confidence, which further weakens the grip of fear, right?
Exactly. It's a virtuous cycle. And as we continue to challenge ourselves and expand our comfort zones, we start to develop a deeper trust in our own resilience and resourcefulness.
So it's not about trying to eliminate fear altogether, it's about changing our relationship to it.
That's a great way to put it. It's about accepting that fear is a natural part of the human experience, but it doesn't have to control us. We can choose to acknowledge it, learn from it, and then take action anyway.
This is also empowering. It feels like we've been given a whole new toolkit for navigating the ups and downs of life.
And remember, it's an ongoing practice. There will be times when that fear-based voice gets louder, when those doubts creep back in. But now you have a framework for understanding where those voices are coming from and how to respond in a way that supports your growth and well-being.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I'd say this. Remember the ocean and the teacup analogy. You are the ocean, vast and limitless. Don't let the limitations of your conditioned mind, that tiny teacup, define who you are or what you're capable of. You have the power to choose a life of joy, purpose, and boundless possibility.
That's such a beautiful and inspiring message. Thanks for listening to the Wellbeing Podcast. Take care, stay inspired, and see you next time.